with us. I'm also seeing Mr. Sriram Sheshadri. Welcome, gentlemen. And we are going to do our sort of spotlight, as it were, on the key highlights of the union budget and get first comments as well. The budget has been described to be the first of Amrit Kal, and Nirmala Sitharaman spoke of a Saptarishi, seven key priorities in this union budget. We'll be playing out key excerpts in a moment from now, but let me just get first reactions from our guest today. Sunil, let me start with you. An overall view as we get ready to play out excerpts of that. Of course, the fiscal deficit has been fixed for 5.9% in 2023-24. I don't think Sunil can hear us. Mr. Sheshadri, can I get your first comments, please? Go ahead, sir.
Hey, good afternoon, Barkha.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, I think overall a very balanced budget, in my opinion. Good thrust on capital expenditure, infrastructure expenditure, continuing to focus on infra expenditure, increasing to 10 lakh crores this year. Fiscal deficit coming under control, still not there yet, but at least there is a commitment from the government to bring it under 5%, 25-26. So that is a good move. There is a lot of initiatives with respect to ease of doing business, doing away with compliance procedures, 39,000 compliance procedures, and then decriminalizing sections removed, over 3,000 decriminalization sections removed. So these are very good move for the business. On a personal income tax basis, at least the senior citizens have been considered. Their investment in monthly income scheme and other postal schemes have been increased. The limits have been increased, which is good for them. And for middle class, especially in the new income tax regime, the rates have been rationalized. But the old income tax regime, whoever is continuing, there is nothing on that. So the middle class is still left lurched. At least a 50% left in a lurch, even after 10 years. So that is what I would take as my first reaction to this budget, Barkha.
That's very interesting that you speak about the middle class being left in the lurch. Obviously, Mr. Sheshadri, you're not that excited by the announcements on the personal income tax. Just your quick thoughts as I then introduce the other guests, Mr. Sheshadri.
Yeah, so the income tax, okay, at least need to go through the entire provisions fully, because all those income tax rate cuts, the finance minister kept saying on the new tax regime that the rationalization of rates. So there is a confusing statement that the tax slab of 5 lakh is been increased to 7 lakh for people who have availed the new tax regime introduced in 2020-21. At the same time, the tax rate cuts which are announced, once again, the finance minister read it out as on the new tax regime. So I believe that it is a wrong reading out. If it is so, then at least a marginal provision has been given. But in my opinion, if it is only for the new tax regime, then it is not going to benefit the most of the middle class or most of the salaried income who prefer to stay in the old tax regime itself. So that is why I said that I'm not so excited if the tax, rate cuts or rate rationalization given only to the new tax regime, not with the whole plethora of.
Right. Let me actually just introduce our other guests at this point. Sunil Alag is with us, Pikiri Nambiar, Yamini Iyer, Madhavan Narayan. Welcome everybody. We had initial comments from Mr. Sheshadri, who says he feels the middle class has, in a sense, still not been given enough relief. The tax relief is only under the new income tax regime and not under the old one. We'll get first comments from all of you in just a moment. But first, a key highlight from Ms. Sitharaman's speech, the one she described as the first of what she called Amrit Kal, being guided by a Saptarishi, the 7 key priorities of the budget. Listen in. Can we play that excerpt? Okay, I don't think it's ready yet. So let me get initial reactions. Sunil, let's go over to you, Sunil.
I quite haven't understood as yet that gentleman saying middle class has been left alone, because the main thing is to manage consumption. And whether it's tourism, whether it is income tax, whether it's anything, they've given a lot of money out. In the last 2 years, the middle income group has been screaming that nothing has been done. So I don't see any reason why, at least my immediate reaction is that, look, they've spent on capital expenditure, they've increased on infrastructure, which ultimately will lead to jobs, and ultimately it will bring down inflation. They've asked agriculture, they've put in a lot of money to farmers. So as far as I'm concerned, my immediate reaction is that what more did we expect from this budget? I haven't understood that as yet from that gentleman. I think I'd score that, look, middle class, they've not, I expected that in shares, there would be a thing on long-term gains, short-term gains, that remain untouched. Tax rates have come down. Even if you're paying 42.3%, they brought it down to 39%. At all levels, they've reduced it. So I haven't understood that gentleman when he said earlier that there's nothing done for the old lot, because I think they've spent on capex. I expected them to increase on infrastructure and skilling employment. That's most important, because ultimately when the industrial revolution came along, there were a lot of job losses because a lot of machines were introduced from manual stuff. So therefore, there is going to be a loss of jobs for 1 or 2 years when we move from the old economy to the digital economy and to AI. Now, the thing is that the importance is to skill the people. That may not have an impact this year, but it will definitely have an impact in the coming years if you don't skill them. And spending on infrastructure, still the old lot will get jobs. They've increased on railways. They've increased everywhere. I mean, I don't see any reason to complain. Of course, there is a limit to how much can we want. There's no end to the desire to want. But I think this is a good budget.
Okay, I don't think Mr. Seshadri actually said it's a bad budget. He said it was a wise budget, but he didn't feel the middle class had got the relief it needed. Before I just get everybody to come in, I just want to play out for our viewers what the finance minister identified as the 7 guiding principles of this budget, or what she called the Saptarishi, guiding the government through what has been described as the first budget of Amrit Kal. Listen in.
Priorities of this budget. The budget adopts the following 7 priorities. They complement each other and act as the Saptarishi guiding us through the Amrit Kal. Inclusive development, reaching the last mile, infrastructure and investment, unleashing the potential, green growth, youth power, and financial sector.
Okay, Saptarishi and the guiding principles. Let me get first comments. Mr. Nambiar, over to you, and then Yamini. PKD. Can we unmute Mr. Nambiar, please? Okay, Mr. Nambiar, you're muted at your end. Yeah, go ahead. Now go ahead. Yeah.
No, I'm saying that, Barkha, this budget is more of like a vision document. It has touched upon almost every aspect of every life. The 7 points which you were mentioning, or you were talking about, this comprises more of like a 360-degree macro approach, because we don't expect a national budget to be focusing on each and every micro aspect. And if somebody looks at that, as Mr. Sunil said, that there is a wish list of you and me and everyone, that we want more and more, that desire can never be achieved. But I would say, as a vision document, as a very progressive one, to taking our economy to the next level, for an example, to start with, the capital expenses is been 10 lakh crore. That directly will give almost every sector, whether it is the core sectors to from both the demand side and the supply side, there is going to be a huge jump. Why? Giving the youth power, which we mentioned. She was talking about all these 7 points are interconnected, and all these points will also help us to improve upon one of the critical area, which is called as unemployment. I think broadly, I would say in my first statement that before we go to the each and every aspect, this touch upon everybody. The Antyodaya, which the BJP has always been talking about, that touch up there with making it a point that the ration and some amount of populism you can always expect from a the election year is going to come. So that is also there. But then fundamentally strong, not just the typical election budget which people have been talking about from the last 2-3 days, especially in the national media. That is not been. It's a very fundamentally strong budget, very progressive one, which is talking about a future India can take into the global power.
The budget is a vision document. Yamini, would you agree? Obviously, what people were looking at for the salaried class were sort of the tax measures. The fiscal deficit has been fixed at 5.9. The revised fiscal deficit at the moment is 6.4%. The finance minister says we're well on our way to achieve our target of under 4.5% of GDP by 2025. Your big impressions, Yamini?
Thanks. First impressions, because the real story is always in the numbers, and they are still to come, and we're still to process them. But I think broadly, there is a very clear script that has been laid out, even through the pandemic, that the government's vision of what it will take to give the appropriate growth stimulus to the economy is through increased investments in capital expenditure, which they have been hoping will crowd in private investment, which in turn will lead to job creation. Now, on first principles, perhaps this may well play out. As of now, despite a slow and steady and now quite significant ramp up of capital expenditure, we haven't seen a dramatic shift in the challenge of job creation, but we'll come to that later. But I do think that there is a clear script and a clear vision, and the government is staying true to that vision. It has been very careful consistently, even in the years when it was doing off-budget borrowing to hide its fiscal deficit, but to present itself as a fiscally conservative, prudent government that doesn't indulge in profligacy. It has stayed that course, and it is moving in the direction of fiscal consolidation to send out all of the right signals on that front as well. What this means for what happens to the rural economy, that I still think is hurting quite badly from the consequences of the pandemic, what it means for the immediate challenge of dealing with the unemployment crises, and what it will finally take to really push private investment. I think these remain big question marks. But a course has been laid, and it is for us now to examine what implications this has, and whether or not the government will, and to hold the government accountable for the targets that they have set for themselves. But it seems a very clear, and in that sense, the finance minister has stayed with the script that her government has scripted, and presents a very clear imagination of how they see the economy responding to the challenges of the day.
Okay, let me get Madhavan and Madhavan to come in as well next. Madhavan, do go ahead.
Yeah, well, Barkha, to be very, hi. The basic takeaway for me is that it's a very artisanal budget, and I'm going to describe it less like a policy document and more like a corporate plan. It is so strong on detail that you would think that the government, the PMO level, will be monitoring the small details of everything, on everything, for a small tribal to everything, to sugar farmer, sugarcane farmers, to everybody. This will require careful implementation and delivery by the bureaucracy and lower levels of the public administration, which is very difficult to pull off. The plus point is that it's very deftly balances the capital expenditure at the high end for industrial growth and manufacturing and all that. At the lower end, let it not be said that the budget is not populist. It is an election year budget, but so carefully crafted and worded that it doesn't read like one. But if you see everything from the reference to specific social groups like women and self-help groups and farmers and OBCs and scheduled castes, there's a lot of targeting of specific demographic groups, which is very election year oriented. The extension of the food grain scheme for a year more, and lots and lots of what I call Sanskrit alphabet soups, which go into creating a lot of populist appeal of various kinds, from medicines to credit. Everything is there, which gives a very populist packaging. But I call it an artisanal budget because it is a lot of hard work that has gone in. It's not just about the announcement of schemes. It has a strong sense of detail, which makes somebody like Nirmala or Sitaraman or Modi say, look, we know what we are talking about. We know exactly where we think the intended beneficiaries are. Now, let me look at the other side.
One second. You said there is populism in the budget. Where do you see the populism?
The populism lies in specific. I can actually was taking notes through the budget, and I can tell you specifically everything from the initial mention of the statistics of Ujjwala scheme or Swachh Bharat, or I don't want to read out the figures; they are all out there in the speech. From Jan Dhan Yojana, cash transfer data. Everything is in number of crores of beneficiaries, and there have been specific measures towards the end of the speech, such as sugar cooperative credit, which will actually go to sugarcane farmers. They are not meant for the cooperatives. And similarly, for synthetic diamonds, if you look at it, they will be for the diamond traders and craftspersons of Gujarat. And there has been a specific 15,000 crore outlay for scheduled tribes for taking basic needs to primitive groups.
Let me jump in.
Last but not the least, let me say, the PM Awas Yojana is up 66% to 79,000 crore. So you are looking at a populist spending at one level and a capex at the higher level. So let me bring to the bottom line is that there is an inflationary threat and there is a delivery challenge. So if this expenditure does take place in the middle of a global economic crisis, it's almost a miracle that Mr. Modi is pulling off. On the other hand, if the expenditure gets out of hand because inflation levels are already high, it basically means that inflation level, I wouldn't mind taking a bet that it might go back to 7% above the RBI state talent. It is a risky gambit. Let's be very clear on that.
We'll look at the fiscal deficit in just a moment. Mr. Nambiar, you wanted to come in, and then I want to actually look at the capital outlay investment, which is now going to be a 3.3% of the GDP, 33% increase. But Mr. Nambiar, just come in quickly, and then I'll play.
I just wanted to give a quick rebuttal to what Madhavan Narayan said. Populism is not whatever you have said, whether it is the Mudra Yojana or the account, Jantan account, or the Swachh Bharat, or the toilets. 12 crore toilets have been created, or 45 crore accounts have been created. So they cannot be a populist. They are basically could have been done maybe say about 20-30 years back in our country, which could maybe because so whatever reason it did not happen. So they are not populist. This government's one of the signature of this particular government is being that they walk the talk. Whatever they announce, they not only just go and do the stone laying, but they also implement it on a very, very structured and time-bound manner. I think there is no populism. I could see it in this entire the budget. It is very, very fiscal prudent. They wanted to cut the fiscal deficit one by one with a proper target of 4.5% by 2015 and 25. So I think it's a very, very structured, touching upon each and every section of the society. There is a huge outlay for the tribal community, scheduled caste and scheduled tribe, the youth, and including the direct transfer benefits to the people. Imagine that those times when we used to hear that when you send 1 rupee from here, only 10 paise reach to the last beneficiary. Here is something like 2 lakh crore of rupees have been directly transferred to each and every individual personal account, and that could not have been possible if you have not created a 45 crore new accounts. So I think populism in an election year is not that way. Just freebies and giving away anything and everything is generally called as a populism. In this budget, I could not see a single element of populism.
Okay, Madhavan, I need to play that except on capital outlay investment, but go ahead very briefly, please. And then the others
populism is about how you define this. The previous governments were focused on the basic needs, such as it was India below the poverty line. Now it addresses the next level of aspirations. So it's about the BJP standing on the shoulders of Congress to take welfare spending to a new level. Whether you describe it as populism or not is a matter of semantics. If it addresses the poorest through handouts, then it is populism. Whether you call it a revdi or not, whether you call it a welfare or not.
We'll get into the revdi. Hang on, guys, just pause for a second. Let's just listen to some key highlights from the finance minister's speech. This is what she said on the increase in capital outlay investment, going up at 33%, now standing at 3.3% of GDP. Listen it.
Honorable Speaker, sir, the capital investment outlay is being increased steeply for the third year in a row by 33% to 10 lakh crores, which would be which would be 3.3% of GDP. This will almost be 3 times the outlay made in 2019-20. This substantial increase in recent years is central to the government's efforts to enhance growth potential and job creation, crowd in private investments, and provide a cushion against global headwinds.
All right, Yamini and Sriram Sheshadri, let me bring you in. Yamini, that is a significant increase. And of course, the question Madhavan raised is the riddle, in a sense, to the budget, that there are all of these increase in spending, in outlays, but the fiscal deficit is on target in terms of, though the revised number is at 6.4. Ms. Sitharaman argues that the government is on target when it comes to fiscal consolidation. What do you make of that significant increase in the capital outlay? Yamini Iyer.
Thanks, Barkha. So just a few things. First, I don't like the word populism. I think spending on vulnerable citizens is better described as welfare spending. And in fact, one of the interesting things about the budget, and consistently actually previous budgets too, over the last 2 years, is that you do find increasingly, as we have after the first round of COVID attempts to move down the path of fiscal consolidation and fiscal prudence, that a choice has been made over expanding expenditure in capital expenditure rather than revenue expenditure. In this budget, the food subsidy and fertilizer subsidy came down, so that created about 0.7% of GDP fiscal space. And I think I'll have to look at the numbers carefully, but I think the choice has been made to deploy that largely for capital expenditure. I just saw NREGA expenditure, for example, allocations are down to 60,000 crores, which is, I think, the lowest we've seen in the last 4 or 5 years. So in fact, I would argue that the budget speech is being politically very savvy at one level. It is presenting and projecting the political narrative of the government very much as welfarist and highlighting some of its achievements, which I think is a fair thing to do, I guess, for any budget. But it is also very carefully, and I'm repeating, we've seen this pattern since 2021. It is very carefully moving away from revenue expenditure towards more capital expenditure, and using the fiscal space that it has created by cutting subsidy on the most recently, but also through an expansion of net tax revenue towards more capital expenditure. Now, the bet that is being taken is that this will result in crowding in private investment and creating jobs. So far, there is very little evidence on the table to suggest that that is indeed happening. The government is choosing to stay on course in the hope that it will happen. And I think we need a much more careful examination of this. And it opens up for me the really big question: what do we do with the large part of the Indian economy in the informal sector that hurt very badly during COVID? In a recovery that is K-shaped, its hurting continues, and we do not have an appropriate attempt to try and address that challenge, regardless of the political projection of being very welfarist.
Let me just bring in Sunil and Sriram Sheshadri on the big points. I mean, in some ways, Sunil, what Yamini, can we go to Sunil, please, now? In some ways, what Yamini is arguing, Sunil, is that if you break down the numbers, in some welfare schemes like NREGA, that the spending has gone down. But there's this giant increase in capital outlay. The fiscal consolidation is set to be on target. Your big takeaways, Mr. Alak?
See, if you asked me, all I'm saying is that, look,
yes, go ahead.
If anyone talks about it being a populist budget or anything like that, the government has, right from the beginning in the last 4 to 5 years, has said that, look, India comes first. Where are 800 million people that are 800 million are below the poverty line? That the government has concentrated on. What are they looking for? Free food he's giving them. So he's been giving it to during COVID times and post-COVID times. So there's no change in the approach. And there is no vision statement in a budget is only meant for 9 months. Look, 20% is supposed to state a vision. And what are they going to do this year? So therefore, a budget is single year. So it's talking about 5 years or 10 years down the line is making a mistake on doing the union budget. First and foremost, he has to focus on what do we need now. The risk factors I've written down are inflation, macroeconomic volatility, and geopolitical conflict. Those are the 3 risk factors which one can talk about. And therefore, look, inflation, how can it be managed? If you increase supply, then if demand is no longer, demand is very much higher than supply, then there is inflation. So there's no question of taking inflationary steps unless you make everybody employed and you put money into their hands. And therefore infrastructure, the capex, everything is going to raise employment. So that I'm saying that, look, this budget is no longer for 1.5 years at least. This budget is going to last at least till June or July, when a new budget will come in for only 5 months. Look, he's looked after everyone and he's looking after business. What is business going to do?
Okay, Madhavan's wanting to clarify on the point he made, or the phrase he used, where he said there were populist schemes in the budget. But Madhavan, just hang on for a second, because I think for a lot of people who aren't policymakers, who aren't politicians, who are salaried professionals, what they watch this budget for is to see what happens to the taxes that they have to pay. Even Ms. Sitaraman, in fact, made a quip today saying, here's the part of the budget that you've all been waiting for. So let's listen into what's happened on personal taxes, and then I'll come back to all of you. Listen in.
Now I come to what everyone is waiting for. Personal income tax. I have 5 major announcements to make in this regard. These primarily benefit our hard-working middle class. The first one concerns rebate. Currently, those with income up to 5 lakh do not pay any income tax in both old and new regimes. I propose to increase the rebate limit to 7 lakhs in the I propose to increase the rebate limit to 7 lakh in the new tax regime. Thus, persons in the new tax regime with income up to 7 lakhs will not have to pay any tax at all. The second proposal relates to middle class individuals. I had introduced in the year 2020 the new personal income tax regime with 6 income slabs starting from 2.5 lakh. I propose to change the tax structure in this regime by reducing the number of slabs to 5.
Okay, can we actually have that complete details on the personal income tax, because at the operative part, actually the excerpt is actually cut, but you can see the details on the graphics. Let me just get reactions. PKT Nambia, do go ahead.
See, well, I would say that the income tax, this is something we always say, that income tax is always considered as a progressive one. The no income means there is no tax. If you have low income, that means low tax. And if you have higher income, you pay higher taxes. So across the world, we know that income tax is always considered as even though there was a call from the last couple of years that income tax needs to be abolished, but then no progressive government can ever say no to income tax. But with the inflationary pressure and to the middle class people, I think this move is going to put a lot more money in the hands of the people, which will further help us to create a demand. And this is something which we were expecting in the last budget. Maybe whatever the reason, it did not happen. But this year, this move will set a new way for the times to come. So I think putting more money to the people's hand, and it will also give an opportunity Well, today, for the people like us who earn an X amount of money, we feel that, yeah, 35% has gone. So what are we working for? What do we finally get in our own hand to spend? So on and so forth. I believe that this is a good move. And again, for a middle class, a dil mange more and more and more. So I think other than this income tax, personal income tax, I also believe that the MSME sector, which may be one of the, I represent an MSME sector. I run one or two businesses which are all in MSME category. I think supporting the MSME has always been talked about, not from this particular government, even in the earlier government, but the way it has increasing more and more support, especially the credit guarantee scheme, which I have been a great beneficiary of it. But I think the implementation of these business schemes for MSME needs to be implemented in the true spirit, which I have seen in the over the last couple of years. The bank, even though the government gives clear instructions, make policies for to the public sector banks to ensure that these credit facilities should be extended to MSME companies, but many banks show their they are not that forthcoming when it comes to releasing those funds to, they don't show that magnanimity as the government is proposing. I think effective implementation of that may be the key. So far it has been good, but I feel that we need a more and more effectiveness and a strong instruction to the bank to ensure that this money comes. Then only the MSMEs are the backbone of our economy. They will be able to generate more and more employment. And that is also, along with the personal income tax, that could be something which I'm very, very happy about.
Let me bring in Sriram Sheshadri, who was less than convinced about the tax relief. Mr. Sheshadri, why is that?
Okay, because the devil is in the details. The 5 lakh to 7 lakh rebate is not for all. It is only those who have adopted to the new income tax regime, not to the old income tax regime. Second, all the rate restructuring that we are talking about, giving money to the public, in the hands of the public or common people, once again goes to the new income tax regime, whoever has adopted the new income tax regime, which means I don't have to invest, I don't have to claim any rebates, I don't have to claim any of the deductions under Chapter 6. Only those people get this benefit. So those who are opting for all the Chapter 6 deductions and other rebates that are given in the Income Tax Act for salaried people or other middle income groups, they don't enjoy these tax reduction. So what is the percentage of people who fall under this is very, very small, because those who have up to a 15 lakh income, I agree. Those who have only up to 15 lakh income and they don't do any savings, they don't do any other contribution in investment plans, and hence they get this benefit. Yes, it does happen. So 10 to 15%, less than 10% or 15% of the taxpayers who are in this bracket get this benefit. That is why I'm not convinced that this has gone to everybody in that lower or middle income group. So Sunil Alagh talked about it, Mr. Nambiar talked about it, saying that what can you expect for? I would have expected some amount of relief to the entire income tax payer who fall within the certain income group. What happened? It is only to those who have adapted to the new income tax regime. So that's why I said it's a devil is in the details. The third point, the topmost, the richer taxpayers are taxed more. That is brought down. Welcome, because most of the people who are paying at a 42%, it has come down to 39% as a maximum rate. But still, I feel that when the comparison is made by a middle income group, salaried people who have more than 15 lakh income, who will actually choose the old income tax regime, they will lose out, and then they will start comparing, saying that you tax the richer less and then you are taxing more. That is why I'm saying it is not convincing proposal. And it is very clear now. I read the budget document. It only applies only to the new income tax regime and not to the old.
And the finance minister said that. That's right. The finance minister even said so. Can I get reactions on the tax proposals from Madhavan and Yamini before we look at the issue of the fiscal deficit? Madhavan, go ahead.
Very quickly, on tax proposals, I cannot say more than what Sheshadri has already said. There is a devil in the details, but let me put it this way. For the middle class and salaried professionals, although there is seemingly some concessions, the other side is that the overall fiscal issue, which we'll be discussing for going forward in the show, is potentially inflationary, and some of the EMI related losses may eat off some of the income tax related gains. This is my bottom line. I'm sure there are better experts to give ball by ball. Let me also clarify, this is my moment to say I've used the term constructive populism in my tweet on the subject. Populism is not a negative word in my dictionary, but I want to ask those people who use the word populism as to when they use it. What I do believe that any welfare expenditure with a targeted attempt at gaining votes would be populism. I call it constructive populism when it creates assets. When it doesn't create assets, it is not constructive.
All
but
right.
then there is an appropriation of the word, because sometimes elite people use anything welfareist as populist, and I want to counter that.
Well, I think Yamini and you are actually agreeing on that. That's the point she was making.
Exactly, I agree with Yamini. Except that
well,
she's better with numbers, I may be better with flight of
yeah,
the
but I think the point
the
point she was making is that populism has a political context and is considered a bad thing, and not all government spending on people's schemes are populist. They are sometimes necessary. Can I just return to the issue of the tax? We look at the deficit in a moment from now, both from Yamini and PKD. Yamini, you first on the personal taxes.
First, I think a nice conversation on another date on populism will be good fun to have,
yes,
and useful too. But no, I think look, the interesting political analytical point to make here is, over the last 8 years, actually, there has been this big question mark politically about how the BJP responds to its core constituency that has traditionally been the middle classes. And it is interesting to see, in 2014, there was this big projection of the Prime Minister as a sort of reformist looking to, liberalize the economy further. And over the course, he repositioned himself much more as a welfareist, speaking to the challenges of the most vulnerable with enhanced expenditures in welfare schemes. And if you remember, the last full budget before the 2019 election had the health insurance program followed by PM Kisan. So I think political positioning right here is really interesting, because regardless of the detail, the speech emphasizes the middle classes as a core citizenry that needs relief, and tries to position its tax cuts that way. I think it's an interesting telling point here about how the BJP is seeing its traditional vote bank and the need to try and engage them or appease them, or whatever word we may want to use there. So that's interesting to me, but it does mean potentially that there will be a 37,000 crore reduction in tax revenues, according to some estimates. What does this imply, therefore, or how the government is allocating its expenditures? This will mean, again, given the emphasis on capital expenditure, that the place where you'll see big cuts is revenue expenditure, and largely, if you take out committed expenditures, this means expenditures for the poorest. And we should ask ourselves, in the context of COVID, who has suffered the most, and where should we be ensuring that as a country, what our ask should be for protecting the most vulnerable?
I think that's a really interesting question, that if the deficit sort of targets are on track, and you have a reduction in tax revenues, where is, and the capital outlay has been increased, where is the money going to come from? Where are the cuts going to be made to make up for this? I can see
just very quickly, we're seeing that too, by the way, in the numbers. If you see, all the social sector schemes are either at par with allocations of last year revenue revised estimates, and you're seeing some big cuts, for example, in NREGA. So I think the answer is there. We'll have to do the math properly, but the answer is there.
And of course, we have to look at those details. These are just early impressions. PKD, I know you have to go. Sandeep, welcome to the analysis. Let me just get a last comment from Mr. Nambiar, and we'll continue with our special analysis. PKD, go ahead.
No, I believe that this budget has got something, not just from as Mr. Sunil was talking earlier, that it is basically for the next 9 months. No, there is a change. The change in the last 8 years of Modi government is that every budget is predominantly more of like a continuation or a progressive one after another. And most of the budget in the earlier times, if you really recall, they used to be reading out the popular measures, like whether it is which train is going where and what is the allocation and etc. Now look at one by one. 2,40,000 crore, the amount of for the railway, which is we never heard of. So that means there is a complete revamp of our overall logistics, whether it is road, 50 new airports, which we are not even talking about. And all these infra projects, including the road development, entire logistics, this will all going to create a large number of employment, direct and indirect. And secondly, formal and informal, both it is going to happen. Now, one of the key challenges the agricultural sector, which have been talking about, is that a farmer gets not even 10% of the money what you buy a tomato or any of the stuff, but you and me buy, they don't even get the 10%. And many of the times, because of the bad weather or not available of cold storages and etc., they lose out daily basis. And we wanted the farmers' income to be doubled up, but then how do you increase that unless and until that kind of an infrastructure is not created? So look at the way from the last 4 budgets, and each and every budget you will find that the farm sector had been given an importance, not from the typically giving the money directly to those people, more than that, creating infrastructure, marketing facilities, cold storages, and most importantly, logistic approach which is provided to them, so that the material from deep south, from Kerala or a Tamil Nadu or from a Sikkim, reach to the main places in a seamless way. So I think this budget, that is the reason I said that it is touching upon every social sectors, and as a vision document, is because of that. It is not just a expenditure and the revenue versus expenditure, which is a typical budget. It has got much more to do with, it's not, definitely it is not a policy document under the Modi regime. Policies are created on all through the 12 months. But I think this is something which we have been waiting for. And I'm very, very, very happy only because of one reason. Because everybody was talking about this is going to be a populistic budget. It's going to be just throwing money and making sure that it's more of like buying votes. That is going to be the theme of this budget. But this budget stayed on the fundamental economics in a progressive way to take to the country to the next level. Look at one more thing. We are becoming a fintech, for an example, fintech and the AI and technology. The amount of importance this budget is giving it to that. It is not only just UPI has already become a
So glowing accolades from you for the budget. But Yamini is raising important questions about social sector spending, whether that's where, in a sense, the additional revenue that the government will need to keep its deficit targets on track will come from. PKD, I'm going to thank you because I know you need to leave. Sandeep, welcome. Just before we get Sandeep's first comments, I just want to play out what the FM said on fiscal deficit, the revised fiscal deficit numbers, the projected fixed fiscal deficit for 23-24, and the target for 2025. Listen.
The revised estimate of the fiscal deficit is 6.4% of GDP, adhering to the budget estimate. So budget estimates of 2023-24. Coming to 2023-24, the total receipts other than borrowings and the total expenditure are estimated at 27.2 lakh crores and 45 lakh crores respectively. The net tax receipts are estimated at 23.3 lakh crores. The fiscal deficit is estimated to be 5.9% of the GDP. In my budget speech for 21-22, I had announced that we plan to continue the path of fiscal consolidation, reaching a fiscal deficit of below 4.5% by 2025-26, with a fairly steady decline over the period. We have adhered to this path, and I reiterate my intention to bring the fiscal deficit below 4.5% of GDP by 2025-26.
Okay, so I want reactions to that, Sandeep. Let me start with you. Go ahead, Sandeep. Can we unmute Sandeep, please? Sandeep, I think you might be muted.
Barkha, I've been listening to this discussion for quite a while, but there was a problem with my connection. So I'll react. I think I totally agree with Yamini that, the welfare things have to reach in a targeted way to the right set of people. And it does not always reach either by doles or by, subsidies. you have to give it, if that is going in a structured manner, like people have done, I think that's a good thing. Secondly, our definition of middle class has got very wonky over a period of time. The number of people, although the maximum interest is about those direct taxes, but that's for a minuscule of the population. So whatever they have done, they have done. They have to do sometime tokenism or symbolic things. They have done it. But the real people in the middle class today, they are not really affected as much by income tax. They are in fact, affected by essentially two things. One is employment. I think that is what they need first, that there has to be employment opportunities and they have to earn. And there, if they're addressing some of the employment issues, I think that's a good thing. Secondly, I think it should come sometime later. There's a relief in indirect taxes by way of, which will not happen here, which has to happen later on in rationalization of GST, etc. I think that is where they will get a relief from. So therefore, again, when Yamini says about these public welfare schemes, what my submission would be, Yamini, I think what they're trying to do is to move away from these entire umbrella carpet bombing kind of schemes to get into more specific and targeted ones, which will be also having a long-term sustainable benefits. It's not just restricted to the next 9 months or 1 year before the election. They're doing the building blocks to carry it through, and that's one thing have been true for Modi or Nirmala Sitharaman's budgets. They never give the impression that they're looking at the next elections or next year. So even right now, you see the confidence they're exuding. It's not that 24-hour an election, I don't know what will happen after that. They're almost talking as if they're there for the next whatever number of years and looking at a longer horizon. And that's been the standard part. I'm not generally making a point just about. So if every time people expect a so-called election year budget or populist budget, I think she has exercised a lot of restraint. The issues which is there is my other submission is, how they're therefore trying to tackle the problem of the bottom of the pyramid is by these direct help through the free ration and other stuff. And that's what they think they have to do in the short term, because short term, you're not going to correct all the problems. And only thing that seems to be working is if you're spending more on infra, some of that is bound to percolate down to job creation at the lower level.
Let's open this up. The points you've made, you're right about the longevity that obviously the government believes in, because there is talk of what the deficit will be in 2025. Yamini, I know you have to go as well. We'll just start wrapping up this hour with last comments from all of you. Sriram first, then Yamini. Sriram Sheshadri on the fiscal deficit, and Yamini's very important point, that if there is a reduction in the revenue from taxes, there is an increase in capital outlay. Where do you think the government is going to make this up?
See, I think on the fiscal deficit, this government had been very, very cautious. And that is why they have said that, they are not going to drastically go back to pre-COVID levels or the fiscal consolidation. And with respect to the revenue generation, I think in the last couple of years, we had seen even during the COVID period, the revenue generation had been consistently going up. So the estimate of 5.9 may give or take, it'll remain there. And of course, some of these will be funded by public-private partners. Some of the infrastructure spend could come from a public-private partnerships and other schemes. The third portion is, at least, even the gentleman before and Yamini was talking about the disbursement of social welfare schemes. I think in the last 8 years, what I've observed is this government had always committed and demonstrated the last mile reach of the welfare measures that they have talked about, be it your Jal Jeevan scheme, or be it your rural electrification, or you talk about Ujjwala scheme, the gas connections to people, or you just name any one of the schemes that has been, even the PM Awas Yojana and the Swachh Bharat schemes. It has reached to the last mile of the public. I think I'm not concerned about the social welfare schemes that will be rolled out. Will there be any problem? But of course, the adaptation of some of these schemes have to be seen at a micro level to see whether that spend or the allocation really happening to that level. For example, NREGA allocations in the past had been, now it is 60,000 crores had been allocated, whether they are fully utilized or not. The last years we had seen some years it has been higher utilization had happened beyond the budgetary allocation, and then most of the time the allocations or the utilization had been lower than the budgetary allocations. So the micromanagement of each one of these welfare schemes need to be seen to see whether this fiscal deficit target of 5.9% would be achieved or not. But it is well within the reach, in my opinion, because the revised one for this year is at 6.2.
6.4.
And 6.4. So and hence reducing it by 0.5% with the buoyancy in the economy that you see, I don't think it's going to be a major challenge. Maybe give or take 0.1, 0.2%. I think it is going to be within that control limit.
Okay, let me bring in Yamini for a last comment before she goes, and we continue with our detailed analysis. Yamini, do you agree with Mr. Seshadri that actually the books have been balanced quite effectively?
Well, I think a very clear choice has been made. I was just, while he was talking, looking at the Excel sheet we're filling up with all the scheme numbers, and you can see significant cuts on NREGA, food subsidy, even the Awas Yojana is on balance, RE of this year and BE of the coming fiscal. There's not that much change. The only sort of increase in allocation marginally we find in the Jal Jeevan Mission, which has gone up from 55,000 crores RE for this year up to 70,000 crores. So a very clear choice is being made. And I think that this has been in the making for the last few years, and the pandemic would occasionally get in the way, that we have done what we need to do in terms of social welfare. There's a certain sort of status quo that we want to maintain there in terms of revenue expenditures. The big bet is on capex, and the big bet there is that capex is going to be the job generator. I still think that we have to be cautious. The environment is ready for greater private investment, but we're not seeing that shift yet. Capacity utilization is still at about 75%. It is going to take time, and the rural economy is hurting. Domestic demand will potentially be a drag, especially because global uncertainties and what that will do to inflation, particularly food inflation, is going to remain a challenge for this year. So a bet has been taken. Will that bet deliver goods? I'm not so sure. If I were the finance minister, and I'm not, so I can pontificate quite happily. If
but these cuts that you took us through, what do you make of that? What do you make of?
Well, I think it's I think a very clear decision has been taken that we are now out of the subsidy regime or the expansion of subsidies that we had brought into play in response to COVID, and there will be trickle down effects of capital expenditure that will eventually generate the jobs and keep the economy going on the growth path. I think very clearly the decision is we stay with fiscal prudence. We want to ensure macroeconomic stability. We want to ensure that the environment for growth for the formal economy stays stable, stays the borrowing costs, and stays strong. And that will come at the cost of the bulk of the Indian economy, the informal economy, and particularly the rural economy. And I think the government is, for the moment, choosing to live with that.
So, Yamini, I'm going to say thank you to you because I know you have to move on, but thank you for flagging that cut in particular in the NREGA scheme, which has seen a significant cut in its allocation. It's interesting, Madhavan, that at a time when you and Yamini were debating over populism, we're actually now seeing that some of the details emerged, and we are seeing a cut in this particular spending. I'm sure Sandeep has an opinion on that. Yamini has somewhat of a take that the priority has been identified differently. Do you agree with that, given these cuts? Obviously, these are early details that are emerging. We have to study these carefully. Madhavan.
Yeah, I think, Barkha, it is in line with what I've been saying for years. The BJP focuses on what I call the aspirations of the people who used to be below the poverty line, but have just come out of it. So its focus is not so much on the bottom 15% as the 30% just above the poverty line. A lot of the spending, which I call populist, but I use it even in I'm calling it constructive populism. But it addresses the needs and aspirations of those who've already been fed. And the feeding was done by NREGA and some of the other targeted schemes. So I do not put Congress and BJP at loggerheads. I'm saying BJP is beginning where the Congress left off. Having said that, let me address the macroeconomic situation with a sense of humor. Yogi Berra was once said, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. No, you cannot take a fork in the road on both sides, but this government has done it by doing what I call elitist spending, or quote unquote. That's also constructive elitism, which is capital expenditure. There's constructive populism at the bottom of the pyramid. The real questions are therefore two. Where does the money come from and what will happen? So where does the money come from? The key point to note is that throughout the speech, there has been an extensive focus on credit. Credit, agricultural credit, 20 lakh crores. Then there is MSME credit, the credit guarantee scheme extended. The state governments are getting 50-year interest-free loans almost on tap for specified tied schemes. So all this credit, the government hopes, will fuel growth. The growth will ensure taxation, and taxation will help in consolidating the fiscal deficit. Now, this sounds like a fairy tale scenario, which an American cynic might call a voodoo economics, which used to be said during the Reagan era. Here, it's from the demand side rather than public side. So, where is the catch in this? The catch is two catches, Barkha. Catch number one is that the corporate plan-oriented budget, which is not a policy document, means huge challenges at the delivery level, of which Seshadri spoke. At the last mile level, the lower end of the bureaucracy and the lower branch level of the banks have to be really hardworking to push this expenditure through, which in an election year may not be so easy, but might work as a long-term vision document. The second thing, therefore, is if it works, what happens? If it doesn't work, there is growth. Great. If it works, there is growth. If it doesn't work, there might be what Yamini talked about, informal sector hurting more, which means it's not so good. So the real issue, therefore, is, as I see it, if this vision document comes through right this year, there is a potential of inflation going up because already we are seeing RBI on the edge. The global inflation is there. If the China recovery takes ground, in that case, the commodity prices and the oil prices go up. Therefore, this is like the last 5 overs of a one-day match or a 2020 match, in which there is always a challenge of having to play strokes, but there's always a challenge of getting caught. So the way the budget has been outlined, they have found the gap between slip and gully, but they have to play every ball carefully through the next 12 months. And this is where I see the challenge. So I don't want to pontificate beyond this, except to say it's a risky gamble in which
I just want Sandeep to actually come in on the cuts in NREGA. We now have the exact figure. It's down to 60,000 crores. So it's a cut of about 20,000 crores, Sandeep. And it was flagged by Yamini because the question became that to keep the deficit numbers on track, you've lost revenue with your tax reform. So you've got to make up those numbers somewhere. Now, in 1 year ahead of a general election, to touch a highly popular rural scheme, started by the Congress but kept and improved by the BJP, some would argue. Why do you think the government would do that? Sandeep, can we unmute Sandeep? Sandeep, you're muted at your end.
Barkha, you see, I think government has a clear plan on that. One starting statement of Sitaraman was that this is a digital budget. And what government has been trying to do on NREGA and such schemes through the direct delivery and having targeted delivery, they have been trying to make the spending far more efficient. Now, if you're talking of the entire net, there may be an issue. But when you are looking, people may have an issue, but if they're trying to do it in a targeted way for maybe certain states or certain places, I don't think it's going to hurt. And that's where they are also going to generate savings, which can plow back into other areas. Secondly, the point which Madhavan was talking about credit, I think it's very important because if you link it with the economic survey yesterday, while the credit to MSME is opening up, the banks are willing to lend money, but where you have a problem is the micro enterprises where money has to flow down, and that doesn't easily flow down. Initially, the things go to the larger MSMEs, and so if these things take credit down the line, I think that's a good development. Last thing, I'm not an economist, but what I know from common sense, this whole expenditure thrust on roads and infrastructure, this in our country, which is very, very labor intensive, unlike say in countries like China, etc., where they use a lot of automation, this immediately creates employment. And a lot of that money actually gets plowed back to the villages because these people come, as we had seen in the reverse, the exodus back, return exodus back to the villages. People come in, and a lot of that money, and I'm in that trade, in that business in some ways, so I know how it generates employment. And so there is a thrust on infrastructure, and on the private side, as you see, also on housing. This affordable housing, and then relaxing the regime for housing loan, and private real estate is beginning to pick up. That is going to also generate some employment. And finally, again, I repeat myself, what I said, that they will tide through the situation through these food subsidies, etc., and compensate between what people were earned. If there are no jobs, or less amount of jobs, you have to provide the supplement, and the supplements will come through these food subsidies, etc.
Okay, I can see Mitali Nikore, welcome to our analysis. Also Ravi Mantha, welcome everybody. And Madhavan, I just want to bring you in for a last comment before we let you go. It's very interesting. So, I think Sandeep is laying out a vision where the push is on infra, the push is on technology, the push is on relief. The government would argue for the salaried employees, or Mr. Sheshadri is not convinced. He says the devil is in the detail, or in the fine print, so to speak. And to that extent, certain social schemes will have to be rationalized. How do you change your mind about initially talking about populism?
No, not at all. In fact, I think this government has a tremendous sense of detail as far as planning is concerned. I have no doubt about that, because they are assuming that this government, so much growth can be created above the poverty line that those below the poverty line earlier covered by NREGA will be able to clamber onto the growth bandwagon through migration or localized schemes such as the tribal schemes that the government has announced. So I would not disagree with Sandeep Ghosh, which is good news, because I often do. The point is therefore in the delivery, in which I'm not sure about the speed of delivery of things. But my deeper comments, Barkha, as I have to leave, is that the best laid plans do take a knock. We have seen COVID coming in the previous 3 years, and after that, Ukraine war. So we cannot forget that big ambitious spending, which potentially always conceals an inflation threat, can be on very thin ice if there is an unexpected black swan event, or if the spending gets out of hand in a non-staggered manner. If the spending is staggered, then they can kind of manage the inflation curve well. But this is so ambitious that I would want to say, take a deep breath.
Well, the opposition has begun flagging also cuts in expenditure on agriculture and allied schemes. So it isn't just NREGA, it's also the PM Kisan scheme, which has been slashed from 3.84% to 3.2% in 23-24.
Let me say that very clearly, Barkha. I've got this government's formula. It believes in private capital spending and credit through banks. Now, it's in the sweetest spot for the government right now is that the banking system is flush with funds because the NPA problem has been brought under control over an 8-year period. So banks are sitting on funds to lend. So this government believes that what it cuts in the terms of the fiscal spending and subsidy will be made in the roundabouts of the credit economy, and they will live happily ever after. So we'll have to see whether this kind of fairy tale scenario holds good, because in an ideal economy, credit, government spending and subsidies will have to be carefully calibrated and balanced for a combination of social stability, human face, and macroeconomic growth. This is where I would be watching. But let me be tongue-in-cheek say something. The speech is for the masses. The numbers may always be the classes, and this is where we'll probably need to sit over the Excel spreadsheets instead of going over the budget speech. I think that is for another day, Barkha.
All right. Thank you, Madhavan. We'll let you go. I can also see Anirban, who's, of course, with who specifically works with the Foundation to Transform Rural India, is with us. And Anirban, I'm sure you'd have a lot to say on these cuts in agriculture expenditure as well as NREGA schemes. Let me bring you in and Mitali for first comments. Sorry, Sriram, you want to give a brief interjection there, Sriram Sheshadri, and then I'll go to Anirban and Mitali.
Sorry, Barkha, I also had to leave because
please, last comment.
Comment.
Please.
I think, I'm not worried about some of the reductions in the subsidies or NREGA schemes, because when the infrastructure push and other capital expenditure comes, it will subsidize or it will actually give the livelihood to the masses who are benefited by the NREGA scheme. I think that is where the balancing act by this budget had been done. And like Madhavan said, the government believes in these capex expenditures not from their budgetary collections or the revenue generations, but from other credit schemes and private partnerships. I think this is more of a vision document of 10 lakh crores. And as I said, in the beginning, the devil is in the details. We need to actually look at the real numbers that are there in the budget document and for a detailed analysis. So even worst comes to the worst, if these allocations have to be increased, government, seeing how the year is progressing, they can actually go for a higher increase of allocations, like what they did in the December month, that they extended 3 lakh crores for the food subsidy for the next 1 year. So similar to that, the government can always go back to that, at least now in the budget speech and document, maintain a balance. I think that is what I would, close my comments with.
All right, Mr. Sheshadri, pleasure to have you with us. Thank you. We'll let you go. I think we should also flag what Sandeep brought to our attention, that the markets are responding favorably to the budget so far, but a lot of numbers are beginning to emerge only now. Sorry, Mr. Anirban, you were wanting to make a point. Go ahead, Anirban.
Yeah, first, I think, Barkha, as you were saying, the details are coming out. Still, we don't have a full analysis. I have heard the speech very carefully, but the focus on rural itself remains limited, at least in the speech. My opening comments were that the whole focus has been on the infrastructure space. Green economy has a focus, and therefore some elements of those green economy are related to rural. So that's another space I see. The third space where I see is around farmers. There have been several announcements which have come for the farming community, largely around, I think, 2-3 are, I think, an important item. One, they have looked at having mechanism for good quality planting material. 2,500 crores invested in creating quality planting material for farmers. Second is this huge focus which is there on the Ministry of Cooperatives. There have been so many announcements, and one can see that it's led by a minister which has brought in that kind of a focus. So the computerization of the packs, the investments coming in for decentralized storage. So these have been then eventually in the tax space, they have actually reduced and capped the top at 15%. So there has been some elements which are there, and even.
Well, I think it's going to take us time to study the document, because at one level, we didn't talk about this enough, but I should talk about the supply of food grains, for example, to other households and other priority households. There's also an announcement of an agriculture accelerator. So while the opposition is agitated about the cuts in the PM Kisan budgets or in NREGA, there is also a focus on agriculture and announcing what the FM called an agriculture accelerator. Let's just listen in, Mithali, for a second to what the FM said on agricultural spending, since that's become a big point of political contention, and we'll come back to the panel. The FM announcing an agriculture accelerator.
Market intelligence and support for growth of agri-tech industry and startups. An agriculture accelerator fund. An agriculture accelerator fund will be set up to encourage agri startups by young entrepreneurs in rural areas. The fund will aim at bringing innovative and affordable solutions for challenges faced by farmers. It will also bring in modern technologies to transform agricultural practices, increase productivity and profitability. To enhance the productivity of extra long staple cotton, we will adopt a cluster-based and value chain approach through public-private partnerships. This will mean collaboration between farmers, state, and industry for input supplies, extension services, and market linkages. We will launch an Atmanirbhar Clean Plant program to boost availability of disease-free, quality planting material for high-value horticultural crops at an outlay of 2,200 crores. Global hub for millets which are Sri Anna. India is the forefront. India is at the forefront of popularizing millets.
I actually think the supply of food grains is could be as politically powerful as the free ration scheme that we saw in Uttar Pradesh. So there's some contradictory trends that are emerging in this budget. Some cuts in social sector spending, agriculture expenditure, NREGA, but then also the announcement of schemes like the supply of food grains. Mithali, let me get you in for your first comments, and then Sandeep. Mithali.
Thanks, Barkha. Very nice to be here today. So I think I'm just going to start with my top 3 hits and top 3 misses, just to lay the context.
Yeah.
The first one, in my view, the increased capital investment by, the 33% increase to the 10 lakh crores, huge hit, hugely helpful to the overall macro picture. The second, which I think we haven't talked about so far in the show, is the Urban Infrastructure Development Fund for Tier 2 and 3 cities, the UIDF. That is a need of the hour. I have been going to pretty much every Tier 2 and 3 city in the last 6 months. And when we look at Varanasi, when we look at Guwahati, the cities are bursting. So I think this is very much, a timely intervention, but we have to see how much is allocated to this fund. The third big hit, in my opinion, is the PM Pranam for use of the alternative fertilizers. So yes, we are talking about food grain and we are talking about millets, etc. But just this entire funding to bring in alternative indigenous fertilizers is very timely and can also help in reducing the fertilizer subsidy in the long run. So these are my top 3 hits. Now in top 3 misses, the first one is millets, again, because we were talking about food grains and it was the year where we want to make India the global hub of millet production. But in order to do that, we also need to have more subsidies for millets coming in, which is something that we didn't see in this budget, and it could have been announced, especially since 2023 is the year of millets. The second one is around green growth. There was a lot of talk today and a lot of focus on it. But again, we didn't talk about coal replacement. We didn't talk about renewable energy. So how are we talking about green growth? Okay. And then the last third miss, according to me, is the gender budget. As I always say, every year, the gender budget has only increased by 2.6. There's nothing imaginative in the gender budget. It's the same set of points.
Let me play that. It's interesting that you should say that it didn't go far enough on women's empowerment, because Ms. Sitaraman made a big point, and I could see the parliament cameras cutting to all of the women parliamentarians. So let's just listen to what the FM said on the gender budget, the dimension of spending on women. In fact, empowerment of women was one of the 7 principles, the Saptarishi, as the FM described it, the 7 guiding principles of this budget. Let's listen.
Economic empowerment of women. Deen Dayal Antyodaya Yojana National Rural Livelihood Mission has achieved remarkable success by mobilizing rural women into 81 lakh self-help groups. We will enable these groups to reach of economic empowerment through formation of large producer enterprises or collectives, with each having several thousand members and managed professionally. They will be helped with raw materials supply and for better design, quality, branding, and marketing of their products. Through supporting these policies, they will be enabled to scale up their operations to serve the large consumer markets, as has been the case with the several startups growing into unicorns.
Okay, you felt, Mithali, that it didn't go far enough. Why is that? Can we unmute Mithali? Mithali, you're on mute. I can't hear you. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Am I audible now? Okay, great.
Yeah.
So I think if we look at the composition of the gender budget, actually the entire announcement that was made about scaling up the SHGs to form large producer organizations is not actually written in the gender budget. It's not included in the gender budget. So the first problem with the gender budget is really the accounting of it, the fact that a lot of schemes may have gender elements, but they're not written out in the gender budget. The second issue is with the composition and the imagination of the schemes themselves. We are still thinking about those self-help groups as being the only way we can bring women into the workforce. However, we need to think about actually scaling up schemes like NREGA, bringing an urban NREGA, and trying to create more and more jobs for women, even in tier 2 and tier 3 cities, which is where they are losing jobs at the maximum rate. And this is actually not being done and not being included in the. And the third aspect is around the infrastructure access to women. We don't actually have any sort of imagination of how can the entire time that is spent by women in water collection, the time spent by women in care work, and actually care economy infrastructure investments, none of that is there in the gender budget. So we really have just carried forward more of the same instead of bringing in more of an imaginative feature.
Okay, I want to welcome Ravi Mantha to the show. I want to also play out in full what the FM said on the tax proposals. But let me just bring in Sandeep Ghosh and then Ravi. Sandeep, go ahead. Mithali has perspective on gender, but if you were to step back, I think everyone's going to want to look at dive deep into the numbers. The opposition is targeting the government for cutting spending in some social sector schemes. Go ahead.
Just two things, Barkha. Nothing. One is reacting to Mitali's point on the coal. There I have an observation. I think the way the world is going right now on the fuel, it would have been foolhardy for the government to make any strong statements on coal and then backtrack. So as we are seeing, government is trying to speed up coal auctions, everything, because they've come to stay that they will have to develop green energy, but at the same time, we cannot easily do away with coal and that to domestic coal. So that is, I think, a very smart move to stay silent. And on a point which Madhavan was making earlier, we live in it's no longer in volatile times. Nowadays, people are calling it a bunny world where things are brittle, anxious, non-linear, and, imponderable. So in that, you really cannot be ruling out those black swan events. You must actually kind of anticipate something will happen and therefore keep your contingency plan. And we have done reasonably well in that through the COVID period, where instead of just going whole hog in one direction, you have done it in installments. And I think that's what the government is doing. And that's a prudent way to go. And they'll have to do course corrections along the year. So I learned this new term, which may not be new for any of you. Forecast has now been replaced by people are now calling it nowcast. So we can at best work on the nowcast and move forward from there.
It's a good phrase, and I hadn't heard of it till now either. So thanks for that, Ravi. Before I play out what the FM has said on personal taxes, I just want your first impressions, Ravi Mantha. Can we unmute Mr. Mantha and get his first reactions? Go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you, Barkha. Look, I think the most important takeaway for me here is that the government had its hands tied. You look at the fiscal deficit during pandemic went to 9.2%, and they brought it down to 6.4 now, and the FM has said that she's going to bring it further down to close to 5 next year. I think the most crucial part is to be seen to be bringing down the deficit, because you don't really want to spook the markets at this stage. There's also the inflation aspect, which if you think about the election coming up in about a year's time, the most important thing that will play in the heartland is the inflation scenario. So the government has to be seen as bringing down the inflation rate, and so their hands were really tied. And what's really encouraging for me was, instead of spending the money on SOPs and giveaways, they're really focusing on capital spending and infrastructure. If you look at the railways, for example, the railways carry 50 times the amount of passenger traffic as airplanes. So that's something that really matters to rural India, is transportation and access to the cities and being able to go back and forth. And so this is something that people will really see the improvements. The Vande Bharat, the access to transportation, and even things like the Awas Yojana, where they're guaranteeing pakka houses in urban India, and increasingly that's going to spread to the heartland also. These are real improvements that will, I think, hold the government in good stead going into an election year.
Okay. Thank you very much, all of you. Just stay with us. What we want to now do is actually play out what the FM has said on personal taxes. We've had varied responses to this. There are those experts who are arguing that given that this relief is under the new tax regime, it may not benefit everybody. There are others who are asking, with this cut in revenue, where will the government compensate for its other spending? Is the hit going to be in social sector spending? We've already seen a significant cut in the NREGA allocation, for instance. But first, let's listen to the finance minister on personal taxes. This is what your taxes will now look like under the new tax scheme, if that's the one you're paying your taxes under. Listen.
Now I come to what everyone is waiting for. Personal income tax. I have 5 major announcements to make in this regard. These primarily benefit our hard-working middle class. The first one concerns rebate. Currently, those with income up to 5 lakh do not pay any income tax in both old and new regimes. I propose to increase the rebate limit to 7 lakhs in the I propose to increase the rebate limit to 7 lakh in the new tax regime. Thus, persons in the new tax regime with income up to 7 lakhs will not have to pay any tax at all. The second proposal relates to middle class individuals. I had introduced in the year 2020 the new personal income tax regime with 6 income slabs starting from 2.5 lakh. I propose to change the tax structure in this regime by reducing the number of slabs to 5 and increasing the tax exemption limit to 3 lakhs. The new tax rates are 0 to 3 lakh, nil. 3 to 6 lakhs, 5%. 6 to 9 lakhs, 10%. 9 to 12 lakh, 15%. 12 to 15 lakhs, 20%. And above 15 lakhs, 30%. This will provide major relief to all taxpayers in the new regime. An individual with an annual income of 9 lakhs will be required to pay only 45,000 rupees. This is only 5% of his or her income. It is a reduction of 25% on what he or she is required to pay now. That is 60,000. So in the place of 60,000, it is now only 45,000. Similarly, an individual with an income of 15 lakh rupees would be required to pay only 1.5 lakh or 10% of his income or her income, a reduction of 20% from the existing liability of 1,87,500 rupees. My third proposal is for the salaried class and the pensioners, including family pensioners, for whom I propose to extend the benefit of standard deduction to the new tax regime. Each salaried person with an income of 15.5 lakh rupees or more will thus stand to benefit by 52,500 rupees. My fourth announcement in personal income tax is regarding the highest tax rate, which in our country is 42.74%. This is among the highest in the world. I propose to reduce the highest surcharge I propose to reduce the highest surcharge rate from 37% to 25% in the new tax regime. This would result in reduction of the maximum rate. This would result in the reduction of the maximum tax rate to 39%. Lastly, the limit of 3 lakh rupees for tax exemption on leave encashment on retirement of non-government salaried employees was last fixed in the year 2002, when the highest basic pay in the government was only 30,000 rupees per month. In line with the increase in the government salaries, I am proposing to increase this limit to 25 lakh rupees. We are also making the new income tax regime as the default tax regime. However, citizens will continue to have the option to avail the benefit of the old tax regime. Apart from these, I'm also making some other changes as given in the annexure. As a result of these proposals, revenue of about 38,000 crore to 37,000 crore in direct taxes and rupees 1,000 crore in indirect taxes will be foregone, while revenue of about 3,000 crore will be additionally mobilized. Thus, the total revenue foregone is about 35,000 crores annually.
All right, that was the big announcement by the finance minister on the new tax proposals. We're also welcoming to our broadcast now Dr. Sanjay Baru and Yogendra Yadav. It's good to see both of you. And since you've just joined us, let me get first comments from both of you. Dr. Baru, to you first. This is your core area, not just as someone who's a specialist and an expert, but also someone who's been on the inside of government. You're aware of the challenges at a time like this. How do you think the FM scored? How do you think the government scored?
Well, I think, she's continuing a strategy that she unveiled in February 2022, which is public investment-led growth, government spending-led growth, because for the last several years, private investment has not been forthcoming. And therefore, you see a sharp increase in revenue expenditure between the budget estimate for last year and the revenue estimate. And you see a step-up increase in capital expenditure. So government expenditure has gone up. And I think the finance minister herself said in her last year's speech that she hopes that with increased public investment, private investment would kick in. In fact, that's the phrase she used. And the economic survey also says that. So we're all waiting for private investment to kick in. So far, there's very little evidence of any significant increase in private investment. But if the demand picks up as a consequence of all this public spending, there could be some, incentive for the private sector to invest. But I think there are several other factors apart from demand that are keeping private investment on hold.
Yeah, can I ask you though? Yogendra, I'm sure, will speak for himself in the next couple of minutes. But people like him today are pointing out to cuts in social sector spending, whether it be in schemes like the Prime Minister's Kisan scheme, the NREGA scheme, for instance, has actually seen an almost 20,000 crore cut, Dr. Baru. And then, is this, you think, to make up for what might be the loss in tax revenue? What do you make of this sort of reduction in some of the social sector spending, in particular the NREGA scheme?
I think the real question was, look, you don't want to increase the deficit. Already it's very high, 6% of fiscal deficit is 6% of GDP. For the last 3 years, this is unprecedented. For a long, long time, governments have been fiscally more responsible. But first they said COVID, then this Ukraine war, whatever, the economy was not growing. So the government has decided to invest in infrastructure and in certain areas in order to push growth up. And where do you give up? If you're going to increase spending in infrastructure, you have to cut it somewhere if you don't want the fiscal deficit to go above 6%. Now, those are political calculations, whether NREGA will give them better yield electorally or some of the other various social schemes. If you look at the targeted programs for tribals, for the women, they're kind of targeted programs. So it may be the political calculation that those will yield benefits. But it's a tightrope walk as long as the economy is not growing. Remember, the average rate of growth of the economy for the last 3 years, from 2020 to 2023, was 3%. It's the lowest in last 25 years. 3% is the average annual rate of real GDP growth in the last 3 years. Now, unless you push up growth, we'll have a serious problem. So I think the whole trade-off between growth, between public investment and welfare is very, very difficult, and fiscal responsibility, if you like. A very, very difficult trade-off. Unless the
do you think she's managed the trade-off?
That's what I said. I mean, unless the economic growth picks up, unless private investment picks up, unless employment picks up, and finally, unless demand picks up, people start spending more. I mean, ordinary people, not the super rich who are, of course, spending more on luxury vehicles and homes, etc. Real estate prices are rising, sales of luxury cars are rising, but common citizens' demands is not rising, right? So bicycle sales are not rising. So unless that picks up and there is greater optimism about the future, I have been arguing for some time now in my columns that really the key to reviving growth today in India is to alter the state of expectations. The state of expectations are negative. That's the reality, and I can go into why I think the state of expectations are negative. And if you see all the optimism being injected by the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister, is in the hope that they can alter the state of expectations. But by and large, people are living in a situation of rising unemployment, rising high inflation.
So you don't agree? You don't agree with the IMF's projection of India as the fastest growing economy in the world? Something that the Economic Survey also doubled down on, Dr. Baru.
Well, at 6%, I think we need to check the data from the rest of the world, because only some of the top countries are mentioned. I think Vietnam is at the moment rising faster than us. So, I do think Vietnam is the world's fastest growing economy. But even if you don't make that debating point, the fact is that at 6% or 5.5%, we are still the fastest growing economy. But that doesn't mean anything, because we were growing at 7.5% from the year 2000 to the year 2015. For 15 years, the average rate of growth of the Indian economy was 7.5%. During UPA 1 from 2003 to 2010, it was 8.2% or 3%.
Of course, sorry, I'm interrupting you, but some might point to the Ukraine war, to COVID, and all the rest of those factors. But if you can just hold your thoughts, I just want to bring in Yogendra Yadav and Mitali and Ravi, who've also been waiting. Hi, Yogendra ji, it's good to see you. I hope we have a stable connection to you now. I noticed in your early tweets on the budget, you're flagging cuts in social sector spending. Dr. Baru was early talking about the government's need to walk this tightrope, cut taxes, lose revenue there, but also, in a way, keep the fiscal deficit numbers on track. What are your big takeaways from the budget this morning or this afternoon, rather? Yogendra ji.
Barkha, first of all, I think we have not just a new budget, we have new kind of budget now. In the older days, and I can see people like Sanjay Baru here who would have seen budgets after budgets. In the older days, the finance minister would get up and say, this is my total income, this is my total expenditure. I propose to allocate my this much expenditure on this thing, this much expenditure on this. A budget is normally understood to be a statement of allocation and of raising resources. Increasingly, this started with the late Arun Jaitley ji, but now with Nirmala Sitharaman ji, this has come to a different state altogether. The budget speech has nothing to do with the actual budget. It's only when the tables come and then your eyes open up and you say, oh my God, this is what has happened. So I'm saying now with complete responsibility, and I would back it up with every single figure, that this is perhaps the most anti-farmer budget in the history of this country. I suspected that initially because when in the budget speech, Nirmala ji had almost nothing to say on agriculture. Usually, in the older days, farmers would get some little dole, some, handout, or at least some very nice dialogue, some shero-shairi, or some subterfuge, grand scheme would be announced which would have nothing. This used to be the older style. Today, she was simply silent, as if farmers don't exist for the first time.
Can I interject to follow up on 2 points you made? One, you said the speech doesn't actually reveal a lot of the cuts. For example, the 20,000 crore cut that's taken place in NREGA. You said she didn't focus on farmers. I just want to play out a small clip of her speech, and I want Dr. Baru and Ravi and others also to respond to this. She actually announced what she called an agriculture accelerator for agri startups. She also spoke earlier about food grains being supplied to Antadaya and priority households. Just listen in, Yogendraji, and I'll come back to you and Dr. Baru and the rest of our panel after that. The FM on the agriculture sector.
For crop estimation, market intelligence, and support for growth of agri-tech industry and startups. An agriculture accelerator fund. An agriculture accelerator fund will be set up to encourage agri startups by young entrepreneurs in rural areas. The fund will aim at bringing innovative and affordable solutions for challenges faced by farmers. It will also bring in modern technologies to transform agricultural practices, increase productivity and profitability. To enhance the productivity of extra long staple cotton, we will adopt a cluster-based and value chain approach through public-private partnerships. This will mean collaboration between farmers, state, and industry for input supplies, extension services, and market linkages. We will launch an Atmanirbhar Clean Plant program to boost availability of disease-free, quality planting material for high-value horticultural crops at an outlay of 2,200 crores. Global hub for millets which are Sri Anna. India as the forefront. India's at the forefront of popularizing millets.
Okay, Yogendra Yadav, you called the FM sort of almost ignoring. You suggested that she almost ignored farmers. It's an anti-farmer budget. I wanted to play out therefore a little bit of what she said on agriculture and farmers. Earlier also, as I said, she spoke about food grains being supplied to Antadaya and priority households. Why are you then so cynical?
I'm not at all, Barkha. I heard this part very carefully, took down notes. That's my annual job, to take down notes, compare with the last one, look at the tables and so on. Just notice 2 or 3 things about agricultural accelerator fund. Number one, it's a fund. It's not budget allocation. Remember that these are 2 entirely different things. Number two, there was an agri-infrastructure fund that was announced 3 years ago, 1 lakh crore rupees. Incidentally, she's not announced any amount for this fund. Did you notice that? Third, there was agri-infrastructure fund which was announced with much fanfare, 1 lakh crore rupees, nothing short of that. Do you know how much has been used so far? 3 years have passed. It was originally meant to be 5 years fund program. So far, only 10,000 crore rupees. Only 10% has been disbursed so far, not even used. And did you also notice the fact that this is actually not going to farmers? This is about agri-entrepreneurs, agri-companies. Yes, the government notices agri-entrepreneurs. The government notices digital stuff. The government notices corporate involvement, public-private partnership in agriculture. The one thing that they tend to forget is something called the farmers. Now, you notice the 4 announcements that she made. Can I now just quickly rattle off Saptarishi, since she used the word Saptarishi? Here are the Saptarishi of agriculture, which normally should find mention in any speech. Number one, you expect the finance ministers to say, at least in the older days, we used to expect the finance minister to tell you, this is how much I'm allocating overall for agriculture. Do you know what is the reality? She did not mention this word at all. But the reality is that overall budget for agriculture and allied sectors has been cut down from 3.84% to 3.20%. She did not mention anything about the big thing, 6 years. Remember, Barkha, we have just completed 6 years of doubling of farmers' income. The least you expect from the finance minister and the economic survey is to say, all right, in these 6 years, we didn't double, but we managed to increase by 10%, 20%, 30%. No figure at all has been given so far.
Okay, let me get Dr. Baru to respond on this. I'm sure you'll have other points to make, but the others have also been waiting, Ravi, Mitali, and Anirban. Dr. Baru, do you agree with Yogendra Yadav's criticism or critique that in a way, it's only when you study the numbers outside of the budget speech that you actually even realize that there have been, where the cuts have been? Is that standard? The budget can't give you every micro detail, or do you actually believe that some of the more difficult things have been left out? In fact, I remember Nirmala was widely praised, the FM was widely praised last year for not trying to put a spin on the fiscal deficit numbers, for instance. How do you think she's fared this year in terms of the transparency that Mr. Yadav is actually questioned? Lack of transparency that Mr. Yadav is suggesting.
No, first of all, Yogender is absolutely right that the structure of budget speeches or budget presentation has completely changed. As you correctly said, it's an annual financial statement. In fact, there is no word like budget in the parliament procedure. It is an annual financial statement along with which the finance minister makes a speech. But at the end of the day, what is being presented to the parliament is the annual financial statement. So you have to go into the numbers. And this government stopped giving the numbers, as Yogender correctly said. It's only about policies. So when you announce policies without announcing the numbers, you really don't know what is the kind of fiscal support that would be given to these policies. And that is where, when we were younger, the first thing we would do as the budget documents came, we would look at these numbers. Now, I'm sure a lot of young journalists are doing their job today. And by the end of the evening, you'll get all those numbers out. But the second thing I would say is that, you see, why does the finance minister do what she has done this year? I think that goes to the heart of the overall macroeconomic strategy for this year, which is that economic growth is not picking up. And there are genuine constraints, both internal and external, working on economic growth. And how do you move the economy forward? You can claim 7%, whatever you claim. How do you actually take it to 7%? So the formula or the road ahead that was been pointed out by this government last budget, which continues in this budget, is I will spend more money. The government will. No, this is the old 1950s, 1960s strategy. The pre-liberalization strategy, where you say private sector is not driving economic growth. So the government has to drive economic growth. And therefore, infrastructure becomes the focus. Everything else is a political statement. I'm doing so much for tribal, so much for SC, so much for women, so much for this group, so much for Karnataka, so much for, that is all the politics of the speech, right? Everybody wants to feel that, they're mentioned. But the core economics of the speech is really public spending-led economic growth in the hope that private investment will pick up. And that private investment has not been...
And you think we're still stuck exactly there, that we are depending on government spending, and therefore a certain amount of juggling, not juggling, but cutting. You have to cut spending somewhere if you have to keep your deficit targets on track. Yogendraji and Dr. Baru, just give us a few minutes to open this up for the others. Ravi, let's bring you in, then Mitali, and then Anirban. Ravi Mantha, go ahead.
Look, I think what we're seeing actually is a coming of age of India. And, I actually, I do agree with Yogendraji that agriculture has been a bit de-emphasized in the union budget. But, please do remember that agriculture is largely a matter for the states. And we have a huge disparity now with South India and North India, and the agricultural scenario in South and North is completely different. And so I think it's actually a good thing that, in a sense, the union government is delegating agriculture where it rightly belongs, which is to the state governments, and focusing on the most important things that affect agriculture, albeit indirectly, such as capital spending, access to railways, railway infrastructure, and then focusing more closely on schemes like housing and things that matter to farmers, rather than direct farm subsidies for what is essentially a fairly inefficient sector still in India.
Okay.
We still have too many farmers, and I think there is a recognition that the urbanization and
but what does it mean to have too many farmers? We're an economy where the farmers form the backbone of the economy. I mean, that is why the farmers' protest movement, irrespective of where you stand on the legislation, was able to exert, Ravi, the kind of pressure it did. What does it mean to have too many farmers? Are you saying that we are too dependent on an agricultural-driven economy? Is that the point you're making?
Well, we're actually not even dependent on the agriculture economy. It's just that there's a huge number of labor employed in agriculture, but it's not as a contribution to GDP. It has been coming down quite significantly over the last couple of decades.
So you don't have a disagreement with the direction the budget has taken. Anirban, you work in rural India. What do you say?
So I have a couple of points to say. We had this long conversation on NREGA. If you look at the economic, survey, last year's data, there is a significant increase in the number of individual assets being created. So NREGA, it started as a unskilled labor program in the late 2000s. But today, with the wage rates remaining stagnant, the local wage rates in many parts of the country are now higher than the NREGA rates which are there. So NREGA, for the last couple of years, we work very closely with the Ministry of Rural Development, so we look at the data also very carefully. So the NREGA is increasingly being seen as an investment for livelihood assets. And there is a whole program of Government of India with NRLM and NREGA coming together.
So do you agree, therefore? Do you agree with this
we have to relook.
cut and spend?
What I'm saying is, so I don't agree with the cut, but what I'm saying is the lens in which NREGA has to be looked at is from a manual unskilled labor, investments for manual unskilled labor to rural asset creation. So, if you looked at during COVID period, it had crossed 1 lakh crores, 1,06,000 crores we had gone. And because there was distress, but today the demands are lower. So even if whatever money, even with this level of fiscal, tight roping which is there, even 60,000 crores, if it is invested in asset creation, it will give a significant jump to that.
Got it.
That's
Got
point
it.
number one.
Yeah.
Point number two on the agriculture piece, which we were talking about. So the whole challenge in this country is we have to move away from the field-based crops, from gehu, chawal. It has to move away to other things. Now, how do you kickstart that? So there, I think initial first steps were there: planting material, decentralized storage, fixing the packs across the country, at least some small steps, and definitely the agri startup space, although it's not directly money going into farmers' hands, but they are actually solving for the backward forward linkages on the ground, and this is the largest growing startup sector in the last 2 years. So I think these are small steps in the right direction. More could have been done. But with the 6% deficit, what needed to be cut out, we'll have to look at numbers to come up really where could have been. I am little a person being focused on rural, so the cuts are not. I'm not too happy with that, but I can't immediately say where we could have diverted more money into this.
Okay, fair enough. I think you're acknowledging what Dr. Baru called the complexity of managing the economy at a time when it continues to be driven by government spending. Where do you adjust then? Where does the money come from? Before I go back to Dr. Baru and Yogendra Yadav, the Prime Minister is also speaking on the budget. We'll cut across live just as soon as we can. Mitali, any thoughts? Can we unmute Mitali? Mitali, you're muted at your own end. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So I was just saying that, just to change the direction a little bit of the discussion that we've been having.
I'm going to interrupt you. The Prime Minister is speaking.
Yeah.
मध्यम वर्ग सभी के सपनों को पूरा करेगा। मैं वित्त मंत्री निर्मला जी और उनकी टीम को इस ऐतिहासिक बजट के लिए बधाई देता हूं। साथियों, परंपरागत रूप से अपने हाथ से औजारों और टूल्स से कड़ी मेहनत कर कुछ न कुछ सृजन करने वाले करोड़ों विश्वकर्मा इस देश के निर्माता है। लोहार, सुनार, कुम्हार, सुथार, मूर्तिकार, कारीगर, मिस्त्री, अनगिनत लोगों की बहुत बड़ी लंबी लिस्ट है। इन सभी विश्वकर्माओं की मेहनत और सृजन को देश इस बजट में पहली बार अनेक प्रोत्साहन योजना लेकर के आया है। ऐसे लोगों के लिए ट्रेनिंग, टेक्नोलॉजी, क्रेडिट और मार्केट सपोर्ट की व्यवस्था की गई है। पीएम विश्वकर्मा कौशल सम्मान यानी पीएम विकास करोड़ों विश्वकर्माओं के जीवन में बहुत बड़ा बदलाव लाएगा। साथियों, शहरी महिलाओं से लेकर गांव में रहने वाली महिलाएं हो, कारोबार रोजगार में व्यस्त महिलाएं हो या घर काम में व्यस्त महिलाएं हो, उनके जीवन को आसान बनाने के लिए बीते वर्षों में सरकार ने अनेक विध कदम उठाए हैं। जल जीवन मिशन हो, उज्ज्वला योजना हो, पीएम आवास योजना हो, ऐसे अनेक कदम, इन सबको बहुत बड़ी ताकत के साथ आगे बढ़ाया जाएगा। उसके साथ साथ महिला सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप एक बहुत बड़ा सामर्थ्यवान क्षेत्र आज भारत में बहुत बड़ी जगह अपने आप एक्वायर कर चुका है। उनको अगर थोड़ा सा बल मिल जाए तो मिरेकल कर सकते हैं। और इसलिए विमेन सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप उनके सर्वांगीण के विकास के लिए नई पहल इस बजट में एक नया आयाम जोड़ेगी। महिलाओं के लिए एक विशेष बचत योजना भी शुरू की जा रही है और जनधन अकाउंट के बाद ये विशेष बचत योजना सामान्य परिवार की गृहिणी माताओं बहनों को बहुत बड़ी ताकत देने वाली है। ये बजट सहकारिता को ग्रामीण अर्थव्यवस्था के विकास की दूरी बनाएगा। सरकार ने कोऑपरेटिव सेक्टर में दुनिया की सबसे बड़ी अन्न भंडारण योजना बनाई है, स्टोरेज कैपेसिटी। बजट में नए प्राइमरी कोऑपरेटिव्स बनाने के लिए एक महत्वाकांक्षी योजना का भी ऐलान हुआ। इससे खेती के साथ साथ दूध और मछली उत्पादन के क्षेत्र का विस्तार होगा। किसानों, पशुपालकों और मछुआरों को अपने उत्पाद की बेहतर कीमत मिलेगी। साथियों, अब हमें डिजिटल पेमेंट्स की सफलता को एग्रीकल्चर सेक्टर में दोहराना है। इसलिए इस बजट में हम डिजिटल एग्रीकल्चर इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर की एक बहुत बड़ी योजना लेकर आए हैं। आज दुनिया इंटरनेशनल मिलेट ईयर मना रही है। भारत में मिलेट्स के अनेक प्रकार हैं, अनेक नाम है। आज जब मिलेट्स घर घर में पहुंच रहा है, पूरी दुनिया में पॉपुलर हो रहा है, तो उसका सर्वाधिक लाभ भारत के छोटे किसानों के नसीब में है। और इसलिए आवश्यक है कि नए तरीके से उसको आगे ले जाया जाए। इसकी एक नई पहचान, विशेष पहचान आवश्यक है। इसलिए अब इस सुपर फूड को श्री अन्न की नई पहचान दी गई है। उसके प्रोत्साहन के लिए भी अनेकविध योजनाएं बनाई गई हैं। श्री अन्न को दी गई प्राथमिकता से देश के छोटे किसानों, हमारे आदिवासी भाई बहन जो किसानी करते हैं, उनको आर्थिक संबल मिलेगा और देशवासियों को एक स्वस्थ जीवन मिलेगा। साथियों, ये बजट सस्टेनेबल फ्यूचर के लिए ग्रीन ग्रोथ, ग्रीन इकोनॉमी, ग्रीन एनर्जी, ग्रीन इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर और ग्रीन जॉब्स को एक अभूतपूर्व विस्तार देगा। बजट में हमने टेक्नोलॉजी और न्यू इकोनॉमी पर बहुत अधिक बल दिया है। एस्पिरेशनल भारत आज रोड, रेल, मेट्रो, पोर्ट, वाटरवेज, हर क्षेत्र में आधुनिक इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर चाहता है। नेक्स्ट जनरेशन इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर चाहिए। 2014 की तुलना में इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर में निवेश पर 400% से ज्यादा की वृद्धि की गई है। इस बार इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर पर 10 लाख करोड़ रुपए का अभूतपूर्व इन्वेस्टमेंट भारत के विकास को नई ऊर्जा और तेज गति देगा। ये निवेश युवाओं के लिए रोजगार के नए अवसर पैदा करेगा, एक बहुत बड़ी आबादी को आय के नए अवसर उपलब्ध कराएगा। इस बजट में ईज ऑफ डूइंग बिजनेस के साथ साथ हमारे उद्योगों के लिए क्रेडिट सपोर्ट और रिफॉर्म्स के अभियान को आगे बढ़ाया गया है। एमएसएमईज के लिए 2 लाख करोड़ रुपए के अतिरिक्त ऋण की गारंटी की व्यवस्था की गई। अब प्रिजम्पटिव टैक्स की लिमिट बढ़ने से एमएसएमईज को ग्रो करने में मदद मिलेगी। बड़ी कंपनियों द्वारा एमएसएमईज को समय पर पेमेंट मिले, इसके लिए नई व्यवस्था बनाई गई है। साथियों, बहुत तेजी से बदलते भारत में मध्यम वर्ग, विकास हो या व्यवस्था हो, साहस हो या संकल्प लेने का सामर्थ्य हो, जीवन के हर क्षेत्र में आज भारत का मध्यम वर्ग एक प्रमुख धारा बना हुआ है। समृद्ध और विकसित भारत के सपनों को पूरा करने के लिए मध्यम वर्ग एक बहुत बड़ी ताकत है। जैसे भारत की युवा शक्ति ये भारत का विशेष सामर्थ्य है, वैसे ही बढ़ता हुआ भारत का मध्यम वर्ग भी एक बहुत बड़ी शक्ति है। मध्यम वर्ग को सशक्त बनाने के लिए हमारी सरकार ने बीते वर्षों में अनेकों निर्णय लिए और ईज ऑफ लिविंग को सुनिश्चित किया है। हमने टैक्स रेट को कम किया है, साथ ही प्रोसेस को सिंप्लीफाई, ट्रांसपेरेंट और फास्ट किया है। हमेशा मध्यम वर्ग के साथ खड़ी रहने वाली हमारी सरकार ने मध्यम वर्ग को टैक्स में बड़ी राहत दी है। इस सर्वस्पर्शी और विकसित भारत के निर्माण को गति देने वाले बजट के लिए मैं फिर एक बार निर्मला जी और उनकी पूरी टीम को बहुत बहुत बधाई देता हूं और देशवासियों को भी बहुत बधाई के साथ साथ मैं आह्वान करता हूं, आइए अब नया बजट आपके सामने है, नए संकल्पों को लेकर के चल पड़े। 2047 में समृद्ध भारत, समर्थ भारत, हर प्रकार से संपन्न भारत हम बना के रहेंगे। आइए इस यात्रा को हम आगे बढ़ाएं। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
Prime Minister there on the budget. Let me get closing